Starting off 0-2 is usually a curse to not make the playoffs. Since 2018, we've only seen one team, the 2022 Bengals, pull off this feat. And 89% of teams that start off 0-2 fail to make the playoffs. Nevertheless, we have a bunch of teams starting 0-2 now who are in serious contention for making it into the playoffs. You know, we have the Bengals again, who are not in a wild card spot, but that's just because they lose on tiebreakers. The Cincinnati Bengals start off 0-2 before beating the Rams. They then fell to 1-3, improved to 5-3, fell to 5-6, and now they're back up at 7-6. So they're unlikely to make the playoffs, but they certainly are a contender. Definitely not as strong as they were last year, but them facing the Chiefs in the playoff is still a possibility, depending on how seeding goes. You know, if the Chiefs get the 2 seed and the Bengals do finish in the 7 seed, they would meet in the wild card round and continue their playoff rivalry. Just not in the AFC Championship game anymore. But it's something to think about. Also, their first win was a rematch of Super Bowl 56. So they did technically avenge that. You know, there are plenty of other teams that started 0-2. The Texans, who, again, don't make the playoffs based on tiebreakers, but unlike the Bengals, the Texans have more control of their own destiny than the Bengals do, because if the Texans win out, then they might be able to they should be able to take care of the Indianapolis Colts and win the and beat over them, though that's probably not enough. They also have tiebreakers over the Broncos and Bengals, should it come down to that. So that's going to be very useful for the Texans. Texans are one of the worst teams in the NFL last year, but they quickly improved on it this year. But they started off 0-2 before beating the Jacksonville Jaguars in Week 3. Texans were able to beat the Jaguars, and from there on out, they were able to actually improve, get into a playoff position at 5-4, go up to 6-4, lose that position when they fell to 6-5. Then they went up to 7-5, and now they're back down to 7-6. So, again, an uncertain future ahead of the Texans, but the Houston Texans certainly do have that possibility of really going for it and going back to the playoffs, and that's something, you know, that you have to give them a bunch of credit for. You know, something that you have to really appreciate the team for being able to do. Now, as far as 0-2 teams from here, I don't really think there's any more like teams that just started just 0-2 that are in a playoff position, but there are certainly you know, teams that are more in the hole. The Broncos started 0-3 before beating the Bears in Week 4. And then they fell to 1-5. Now, I'm not sure the history of teams starting off 1-5 or making the playoffs are. I'm not too certain on that, so I can't tell you how that would make history in that regards. I know I forgot to look that up. But then the Bengals went up to 6-5, fell to 6-6, and now they're back at 7-6. Again, not in the playoffs because they do lose on tiebreakers, but they certainly are in that running, and they're only one game out from having the AFC West title, though in that regards they do not have control of their own destiny. The Denver Broncos were, again, a very bad team last year. They fired the head coach. They sucked, but then they started to go on a rise. Now, this could be similar to the Lions last year, who started 1-6 and didn't make the playoffs on tiebreaker. Again, not sure the history of those teams, but 0-3 teams making the playoffs is very rare. 2.5% of teams do it. The 1981 Jets and the 1982 Buccaneers are some examples. It happened most recently with the 2018 Houston Texans. And there were like a few other teams that started off 0-3 that made the playoffs. But it happened where you have a 1-40 chance of doing it. The Vikings are actually in a playoff spot right now, and they could even win out the North after they started out 0-3. Although I forgot who their win in week 4 was against. I forgot who they beat in week 4. That was my bad. And then the Vikings just fall to 1-4 before going up to 6-4, falling down to 6-6, and now they're back at 7-6. So, they're actually relatively comfortably in a playoff spot as of now. They have a little bit of room to fall before they would lose the playoff spot, I think. So the Vikings, they're very likely to reach the playoffs if they're starting 0-3. So you have, of course, that team to contend with. And then you get to 0-4. Only one 0-4 team has ever made the playoffs, and that's the 1992 San Diego Chargers. The Chargers were a team that had a very bad start, and they were able to win out the AFC West, and that's how they made the playoffs. They're the only team that's done it. The Bears could go alongside them. They saw 0-4, and now they are 5-8. Now, again, that's not good at all. But they are technically only one game out of postseason contention, though they would lose on the tiebreakers. If the Bears win out, there is that possibility of them making the playoffs. They would also become only the third team in history to make the playoffs with a starting 4-8 after the 2008 San Diego Chargers and the 2022 Jacksonville Jaguars. Packers lost that Week 18 game that could have put them alongside the Jaguars to be the second team in history to do this and the first wild card team to do this. But again, they ultimately failed to make the playoffs. And what I will say about 4-8 is that it's a bigger hole to come out of, really, than an early hole start, because you pretty much have to win out and hope that some teams lose out to make it. With 17 games, it's a little bit less impressive, but even then, it still involves a lot when you're in that deep of a hole. Giants, they're trying to become the first 2-8 team to make it to the playoffs. They've won 3 straight to put them at 5-8, but they're likely to not make the playoffs. The chance is only 2% like the Bears. But one has to wonder, they're only one game out of playoff contention. The Bears are actually a better chance than 2% because their opponents are not as difficult. The Giants do have to go up against the Eagles twice, and they're going to need a bunch of miracles if they want to make it there. They actually started 1-1 by making their biggest comeback in history in week 2 against the Cardinals. But then they fell to 1-5. They did improve to 2-5 and then fell down to 2-8. No 2-8 team has ever made the playoffs. A 2-7 team once made the playoffs, the 2020 Commanders. But no team has ever started at 2-8 and made a successful playoff push. So the Giants could really embarrass a bunch of teams and then make it into the playoffs. But again, it's highly unlikely. But again, one has to just think as to what kind of spectacular collapses and surges can occur late in the season, and which teams really have that, best chance of making it for the playoff push.